We spend so much time analyzing different generations, but there is this massive, fascinating mystery sitting right in the middle of our demographic charts. I'm talking about the forgotten generation, Generation X, the folks born right between 1965 and 1980. They are the people quietly amassing wealth right now, yet they behave as if they're literally one single paycheck away from total disaster. So today, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the deeply hidden psychology behind how Gen X manages their money, and exactly why their habits are completely unlike anyone else's.
I mean, think about it. We endlessly obsess over cultural stereotypes, right? We've got boomers and their real estate empires on one side, millennials and their avocado toast on the other, or Gen Z's side hustles. But what about Gen X? They are the ignored financial survivalists. They're your uncle who has $50,000 sitting in savings, but absolutely refuses to replace his 15-year-old Toyota. They're the friend who will just casually drop $500 on concert tickets, but still clips paper coupons at the grocery store. It seems contradictory, right? Well, to understand why they do this, we really have to go back in time.
Let's dive into our first section, the Great Economic Betrayal, or as I like to call it, when the formula broke.
Okay, picture it. It's 1983. You're 10 years old, watching your dad deposit a steady, reliable paycheck from the company he's been at for 15 years. The promise back then was super clear. You work hard, you get a pension, you pay off the mortgage, and you retire safely. The formula worked. But then we hit 1995. The shift begins. You watch your mom's company suddenly downsize loyal workers with absolutely zero safety net. And then 2008 happens, the ultimate betrayal. You did everything right, and you just watched your 401k get sliced in half and your home value completely crater. The reliable rules of hard work and savings were just pulled right out from under them. The formula? Yeah, it was a total illusion.
Which perfectly sets up paradox number 1, defensive pessimism in action.
So look at this data from the 2023 Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies. It shows that 70% of Gen X says they are utterly terrified about retirement. 7 out of 10. Yet simultaneously, they actually have the second highest 401k contribution rates of any generation. It's wild. They absolutely do not believe the system will actually work for them, but they participate in it obsessively anyway. Psychologists actually have a name for this specific behavior. It's called defensive pessimism. It's basically the act of assuming everything will go wrong, so you prepare obsessively for it. By doing this, you ensure you're covered when disaster inevitably strikes. So their behavior, it isn't irrational paranoia. Honestly, when you graduate into a recession and buy a house right before a historic market crash, you aren't a pessimist. You're a realist who has just been burned way too many times. It is a highly calculated survival tactic.
And this mindset, it deeply bleeds into their careers. Federal Reserve data actually shows Gen X has higher rates of self-employment and secondary income streams than both boomers and millennials. But for Gen X, the side hustle is an escape tunnel. It is not about ambition. They refuse to quit their day jobs. That Etsy shop or that weekend consulting gig isn't about ditching the 9-to-5 to go live some digital nomad dream. No way. It is pure insurance against sudden corporate layoffs because they vividly remember their colleagues being walked out of the building with cardboard boxes.
All right, moving right along to paradox 2, trust brands and experiences. According to a really interesting Adobe study, Gen X has absolutely zero loyalty to modern corporate institutions. Like, they will quit a Fortune 500 company via a quick 2-sentence email. Yet, on the flip side, they are 34% more likely than millennials to stick with brands from their youth. They will literally drive all the way across town just for the local coffee shop owner who knows their order. And they still buy the exact same Levi's they wore in high school. Why? Well, because institutions betrayed them. Real people and those old reliable brands, they didn't. Which makes this next number so fascinating. $3,000, $3,000. According to Eventbrite, that is roughly how much Gen X spends every single year on live experiences, concerts, and travel. That is more than any other generation in actual dollars. So the exact same generation that is financially paranoid is also experientially extravagant.
The genius behind this apparent contradiction is actually incredibly simple. Experiences provide the best ROI because memories cannot be repossessed. Gen X figured out the hard way that houses can go underwater and cars lose their value. Possessions mean absolutely nothing when the economy tanks. But a 1994 Pearl Jam concert, that is a memory no bank can ever foreclose on. In a totally unstable economy, experiences are simply the safest investment out there.
That brings us to our third and final contradiction, paradox 3, control and redundancy.
Data from Cerulli Associates reveals that Gen X is the least likely generation to use traditional financial advisors. And you can probably guess why, right? They watch their own parents lose their pensions by trusting so-called experts. Gen X is the last generation that truly believes in self-education through reading actual books. They prefer to build their own complex, color-coded spreadsheets and just manage their own portfolios. They will educate themselves, verify everything twice, and trust absolutely no one's advice without doing the homework first. Again, it's self-defense, not arrogance.
Now, Experian data shows Gen X actually carries the highest total debt of any generation. Wait, what? How does that make sense for anxious savers? Well, they are incredibly strategic about it, dividing debt into two very distinct categories. There's predictable debt, like a $400,000 mortgage, which has a clear timeline and offers them total control. Then there is chaotic debt, like credit cards. They will absolutely refuse to carry a $2,000 credit card balance for a quick vacation because they watched consumer debt swallow their parents whole back in the 80s and 90s. They leverage debt for assets, never for couches.
Which brings us to this hilarious irony found in AARP data. 61% of Gen X keeps physical files of important documents, compared to just 34% of millennials. Think about that for a second. The very generation that literally built the internet, the people who are perfectly comfortable with complex tech, still insist on keeping physical paper records locked away in a drawer.
They operate on a principle called redundancy by design. It means trusting technology to work most of the time, but trusting physical paper to work all of the time. Digital banking apps? Sure, yes. But paper statements and a heavy, fireproof safe in the bedroom closet? Also yes. Keeping a safe might seem totally excessive to some people, but, only if you haven't lived through the multiple digital system failures and evaporated corporate promises that Gen X has.
All right, let's tie all of these fascinating threads together. Our conclusion? The financial survivalists. The Gen X playbook really boils down to three very simple rules. Trust nothing, prepare for everything, and show up anyway. They are not confused and they aren't contradictory at all. They are highly adapted financial survivalists. They are playing in an economy that broke its promises to them very early on, and they adapted beautifully to ensure they are never, ever caught off guard again.
It all comes down to this one thought. They play the game, but they never forget it's rigged. Think back to that kid standing in the bank in 1983, learning that hard work equals security. They learn the lesson, for sure, but they also learn that the system can change the rules whenever it wants to. Their current habits are a perfectly logical, brilliant response to the world that shaped them.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to ponder. How has your own generation's history shaped the hidden rules of your wallet? Because as we've seen, your money habits aren't just random. They are a direct response to your world. So take some time today to look at your own financial psychology. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this provided a totally new perspective on the brilliant, somewhat paranoid financial minds of Generation X. Catch you next time.